展望中国经济未来增长的内部动因是什么？
You will see a boom of technologies in China in the coming years, and that should supply a lot of growth to the economy.
如何预判影响中国经济的外部因素变动的时间节点？
We have felt that there's no reason why this shouldn't happen by the summertime.
本期的第一财经中国经济论坛呈现的是2019冬季达沃斯第一财经电视专场。中国金融监管高层、国际金融协会总裁、全球投资高管与经济学者共同展望中国经济。2019年新年伊始，第一财经走进瑞士冬季达沃斯，再度携手世界经济论坛推出第一财经电视专场论坛。经过波诡云谲的2018年，全球经济增长遭遇瓶颈，外部不确定性犹存。如何看待中国经济的未来？今天的第一财经中国经济论坛呈现的就是2019冬季达沃斯第一财经电视专场论坛的精彩内容，主题是中国经济展望，共有6位嘉宾参与。方新海，中国证监会副主席 ；Timothy Adams， 国际金融协会总裁 ；Youngkin， 凯雷投资集团联合首席执行官；赵令欢，弘毅投资董事长总裁；金克宇，伦敦政治经济学院教授。论坛主持人杨燕青，第一财经日报副总编辑，第一财经研究院院长。精彩的内容即将展开，我们的论坛马上开始。
China's growth expected to be 6.2% in 2019 and 2020 by the IMF. So how are the domestic and global factors will shape China's economic outlook down the road?
There's no doubt that the Chinese economy is slowing down. I think there's some confusion as to why it is slowing down. A few years ago, including this audience, was very concerned about the financial vulnerability of the Chinese economy. And since then, in the last 2 years, the government has really vamped up its efforts in implementing deleveraging efforts. And we have seen leverage really stabilize or even come down in various sectors. So for me, it's slower but safer.
I think that's right. It's self-engineered, right? And for the right reasons, in a more sustainable trajectory. I think what markets are looking at is the overlay of trade tensions with the U.S. Or tensions globally, and does that exacerbate the decline in a way in which we didn't fully appreciate, given the self-engineered nature?
Even at a 6% rate of the size, is fairly rapid growth. It will continue to contribute significantly to the world growth. But for China, I think it's time for quality, both in structure and also inclusiveness, and that takes time. So I think quality is the policy orientation and the market wants.
Yeah, I do think that it's important, though, to recognize that today's China is very different than China 10 years ago. And the contributor to GDP growth, which historically was all export-driven, is now very much internal consumption-driven. And so what we saw really in the fourth quarter, and it showed up in the economic data, and we have a very large portfolio in China, was that the consumer was nervous. And so when you take an environment where you have trade disputes that are very well understood, and you have a deleveraging that's gone on, and you have a consumer that drives a meaningful part of your economy, it's not surprising that when the consumer gets nervous and spends less, that the economy slows down.
Yeah.
This is a very basic input into GDP growth, and we see a new kind of Chinese consumer today.
A lot of foreign companies who do business in China did see their sales slow down in China, particularly in the last quarter. That's where the worries come from, right? But my message, to this audience today is that yes, China's economy has some short-term challenges, right? Trade dispute, consumption slowdown. But on a medium and to long-term basis, 3 to 5 year, if you look at that horizon, the Chinese economy should be very healthy and should continue to be a huge growth engine for the world.
And also, Tim mentioned the trade disputes between China and United States. So as American investors and also the economists, and what kind of the deal we're going to have, in your mind?
Yeah, both sides recognize we need an agreement. And that is going to require more negotiations than we've had. We have felt that there's no reason why this shouldn't happen by the summertime.
Now we're at a point where the harm, both short-term uncertainty and long-term harm, is surfacing. And people started to reflect how we got here. The fact is, in the last 10, 20 years, both countries benefited from trade and collaboration greatly. And interdependency is a fact of life. So we're at a point where we either advance this so that we create win-win situation, or we go backwards and create big-time losers. I don't think this is about just the trade imbalance. We've developed a model to the level where there's some structural, it's not compatible, and it's not a simple matter to see which system is right and the other is wrong. Both systems need to adapt to the new reality. We're at an age where globalization is getting to 4.0, supported by proliferation of digital technology and internet. So I think we have some work to do, and I'm very confident through time and efforts we're going to work through these structural issues and other issues.
And I agree with your comments, but I just want to bring two facts, which I think is enlightening. When the tariffs on Chinese imports increase for the U.S., it's not that U.S. firms start to import less. They just don't import at all. So there are a lot of zeros in the data that we just recently saw, which means that currently what's happening is that this is really affecting the restructuring of the global supply chain. And there is an enormous amount of cost associated with, okay, I can't work with China, I can't work with Chinese inputs, I need to go and search for other sources. Second fact is that when the tariffs have increased against Chinese imports, actually U.S. exports or imports of Chinese goods did not decrease as much as the other way around because there's more dependence of U.S. on Chinese intermediate goods. So it's absolutely not clear who is hurt more.
I do think the longer this goes, the more risk there is that permanent changes in supply chains are effectuated. And companies are thinking about this every day now because people who run businesses can't make decisions month to month to month to month. Yeah. Supply chains are complicated. You have to make sometimes 5 and 10-year commitments to manufacturing and shipping lanes. And as a result, this is exactly the risk, which I'm hoping is part of the heat that gets turned up here, recognizing that both sides will not get everything they want, but there needs to be an agreement.
What happens with the trade war is exactly what you described, a disruption. Yeah. And it's causing a lot of chaotic, reactive, unplanned activity. And I think the harm of that is showing now. And it's going to show up in consumers' cost.
怎样深度挖掘经济增长潜力？
The key challenge in the Chinese economy today is how do you allow resources, whether it's credit or loans, to flow to the more productive areas of the economy?
为什么要对中国的长期前景抱有信心？
And if you observe the Chinese history of economic reforms, whenever economic growth rate slows down, reform speeds up.
第一财经中国经济论坛，请您继续收看。展望中国经济未来增长的内部动因是什么？
You will see a boom of technologies in China in the coming years, and that should supply a lot of growth to the economy.
如何预判影响中国经济的外部因素变动的时间节点？
We have felt that there's no reason why this shouldn't happen by the summertime.
本期的第一财经中国经济论坛呈现的是2019冬季达沃斯第一财经电视专场。中国金融监管高层、国际金融协会总裁、全球投资高管与经济学者共同展望中国经济。 今天的第一财经中国经济论坛呈现的是2019冬季达沃斯第一财经电视专场论坛的精彩内容，主题是中国经济展望。在刚刚的节目中，中国证监会副主席方星海认为，中国经济非常健康，会继续成为世界经济增长引擎。国际金融协会总裁 Timothy Adams 指出，外部环境变化加剧了经济放缓，自我调节让中国经济发展更加可持续。凯雷投资集团联合首席执行官格林央平认为，中国的经济增长已经由出口驱动向消费驱动转变，解决贸易争端的时间越长，全球供应链的风险就越大。弘毅投资董事长总裁赵令欢指出，中国更加注重经济增长的结构、质量和包容性。数字技术与互联网的普及给全球化带来结构性变化，贸易摩擦的危害正在显现，将体现在消费成本中。伦敦政治经济学院教授金克宇认为，中国经济增速虽然放缓，但更安全。贸易摩擦影响了全球供应链重组，产生了巨大成本。那么，面对错综复杂的全球形势，中国当如何应对？方星海、Timothy Adams、格林央品、赵令欢、金克宇、杨燕青正在阐述各自的观点。第一财经中国经济论坛，请您继续收看。
First of all, I think there will be a deal, right? And China is slowing down, right? Because consumption, because export and so forth. China has enough policy tools to cushion this slowdown, both on the monetary side as well as the fiscal side. So I don't worry about the short-term prospect of the Chinese economy. But what's more important when you look at China, the more important thing is that does China stop reform, right? In the process of trying to counter slowdown of the economy. And on that aspect, the answer is no, because China continues to move reform forward. The Chinese highest authority approved a plan from CSRC, which I work, to launch a new science and technology board in the Shanghai Stock Exchange. And this is very significant, what we call supply-side reform, because such a board would allow a great amount of technology firms to get an early listing in the Chinese stock market, to get financed with equity capital rather than debt capital, right, to fuel their future growth. And given all these manpower and capital in China, you will see a boom of technologies in China in the coming years, and that should supply a lot of growth to the economy. And that's why I said I'm quite optimistic on the medium to long-term basis about the Chinese economy. Any company in China who wants to list needs to have a 3-year consecutive profit. And not only just profit, the profit has to reach certain amount. So that prevented, right, a lot of technology companies from getting listed and get financed through the public market. And we will address this issue, right? It was the Science and Technology Board. So it will be a great engine for technology companies in China.
I just want to comment on this is a significant event in the ever-evolving and growing Chinese capital market. But this time, this is largely based on a registration system versus you make an application waiting for a CSRC.
So it's a milestone.
That really reflected this, Chinese phenomenon that says development set up the better rule. So this is very significant to us. Not only technology, that's a policy orientation, but also for companies and underwriters for the first time carry the responsibility of truthful disclosure and be accountable for that. It's a reform. And also, I think that's an ongoing process.
China is also opened up the economy at a very rapid rate, right? The financial sector as well as the manufacturing sector. So both reform and opening up continue at an accelerated rate. And that gives us a lot of confidence in the Chinese economy going forward.
I think everyone is so optimistic about the Chinese economy, but I think we also do need to face some real issues. I think there's an excessive focus on the debt levels and the slowing growth rate. I really don't. I think these are symptoms, okay? They're not the real cause of the issues or the potential. I think one of the key reasons, and both of you have touched upon, which is the financial system. And the key challenge in the Chinese economy today is how do you allow resources, whether it's credit or loans, to flow to the more productive areas of the economy? How do we unleash the latent potential and latent dynamism of the private sector, of the household, and of the technology sector? Because there are plenty of things to be optimistic about. Services is rising, service productivity is rising, but unless you kind of make the conduit of savings and investment and resource flows into the right part of the sector, we can always be optimistic and say there's long-term growth potential, but it will never really be realized.
May I just echo that? I think you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that those flows go to the productive enterprises, either through capital markets or ensuring the banks can make true credit commercially based decisions. If you fix the flow, the stock fixes itself over time.
China has the world's best digital infrastructure. I'm talking about, number of netizens, the smartphones that they're holding, time they're spending, things they do online, offline, and with their phones, and they're still advancing at a faster pace than the rest of the world. China also has a very clear policy focus on developing and better people's life. And then China has gotten to have world's largest middle-income consumer group. All of that is still there. The foreign capital actually started to notice potential slowdown in the States and started to look at data and regain their interests in the ongoing Chinese development. Yeah. So the capital is shifting a little bit, but more importantly, China has a lot of capital. It's not like 10 years ago where China relies on foreign capital a lot. China now actually is trying to optimize its economic structure so it could present new opportunities that attract capitals from both world and China. Digital economy is just very appealing. So you have a situation where there's new drivers that is built on the infrastructure, large consumer, and a clear policy orientation.
Kerry has a very good point. I mean, we have to allocate our resources better, right? To let the resources to flow into the more productive sectors. But how can you do that? You have to accelerate market-based reform. There's no other way of doing that. And if you observe, the Chinese history of economic reforms, whenever economic growth rate slows down, reform speeds up. And that's a truth in China. So you see reform being speeded up now.
未来中国经济的活力之源在哪里？
It is this evolution to Chinese consumption that brings to bear the entire suite of economic opportunities and challenges. That's going to be much more dynamic than it ever has been.
该如何看待当前全球多边体系受到的冲击？
What we're facing is human development together. We're limited in our thinking with the old framework.
第一财经中国经济论坛，请您继续收看。展望中国经济未来增长的内部动因是什么？
You will see a boom of technologies in China in the coming years, and that should supply a lot of growth to the economy.
如何预判影响中国经济的外部因素变动的时间节点？
We have felt that there's no reason why this shouldn't happen by the summertime.
本期的第一财经中国经济论坛呈现的是2019冬季达沃斯第一财经电视专场。中国金融监管高层、国际金融协会总裁、全球投资高管与经济学者共同展望中国经济。今天的第一财经中国经济论坛呈现的是2019冬季达沃斯第一财经电视专场论坛的精彩内容，主题是中国经济展望。在刚刚的节目中，中国证监会副主席方星海指出，中国有足够的政策工具来缓解短期的经济下行压力。科创板将推动中国未来技术和经济的大发展。科创板能够推动科技企业快速上市融资。他表示，提高资源使用效率的唯一方法就是加快市场化改革。每当中国经济增长率放缓时，改革就会加速。弘毅投资董事长总裁赵令帆指出，科创板以注册制为基础， 是一项重大改革。中国的数字基础设施世界领先，数字经济是中国发展的新驱动力。伦敦政治经济学院教授金克宇认为，中国经济面临的主要挑战是如何促使资源流向更高效的行业和部门。那么，当前的全球多边体系将何去何从？方星海、Timothy Adams、格林 Youngkin、赵令宽、金克宇、杨燕青正在阐述各自的观点。第一财经中国经济论坛，请您继续收看。
The biggest optimism comes from that the opening up always work with the reform by China itself. So maybe you can talk a little bit on the development country status on the WTO reform.
It's for sure true that China wants to uphold the multilateral system, no doubt, support globalization. Now, one has to be aware that this kind of system is established decades ago in the 80s, and things have changed a lot. You need to give more voices to emerging markets. China is now opening up the financial services, so in that way, they are going to be importing a lot more of these kind of, service goods. China has recorded the first current account deficit. Okay, that is a very important, let's say, milestone, because what that means is that China can act as a source of aggregate demand in the world economy when aggregate demand in Western Europe or the US fails. It is the first time that is turning from a producer to a consumer, and you need a strong Chinese economy to help sustain the global economy, especially when a recession is potentially in sight.
It is this evolution to Chinese consumption that brings to bear the entire suite of economic opportunities and challenges. And that's going to be much more dynamic than it ever has been. And I think this is the entire globe integrated in a way that we all of a sudden are noticing that when the Chinese consumer doesn't consume, or businesses in China are having confidence challenges, so all of a sudden we get back to where we started, which is the concept of re-engineering supply chains away from China completely and having two isolated behemoths that go about their business independently is just not realistic. And in fact, both countries absolutely need success economically globally. And so therefore, we're going to be mutually dependent on a go-forward basis.
Our institutions, the WTO, our politics are really still situated in a 20th century view of industrial America and industrial China. Manufacturing is less than 10% of the U.S. economy. Percentage of the workforce that in manufacturing has been dropping since the 1940s. We are an experience economy, a services-based, and it's about the role of intangibles, intellectual property. That is the 21st century. But we really need to move the conversation and the institutions, including the WTO, to a new 21st century. It really talks about the role of data. That is the new oil of the 21st century.
I think you mentioned the reform of the safest process, right? So if the discontent is just about IPR protection, China will improve on that because China is becoming an innovative economy as well. So it needs IPR protection for itself. The motivation is kind of more sinister, right? It's like, China is a different country. We got to somehow put China down. That's quite dangerous in the sense that, it will be very costly for the United States to begin with. And then China will obviously, try to innovate as much, even harder as we've been doing. For a person like us, who perhaps are not, technology people, but when I talk to the technology people in China, they're actually not afraid of, because, technological innovation in today's world is not that difficult. No. Yeah, you just put manpower, you put capital in, boom, you come out with new technologies. It's not that difficult, and. So we will see. I think, if as I said, the motivation is somewhat sinister, that's going to fail.
And also down the road, maybe global community with the shared interest and the shared fate.
Shared future.
Shared future will be the real future. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you
Please
very
join
much.
us with
Thank
a big
you.
applause. Thank you.
I think we've just gone through problem discovery phase. What we're discovering, and soon I think we'll have consensus, what we're facing is human development together. We're limited in our thinking with the old framework.